Hello Austin, and hello world. Welcome to Lone Star Politics. Dr. Love, and here today in the studio we actually have several real doctors, and I'm very honored to bring to you Dr. Paul Connett, the world's leading expert on water fluoridation. I'm just absolutely thrilled to have him here, so welcome Dr. Connett.
Thank you, Rob. I'm happy to be here.
We also have Dr. Laura Presley, who is a PhD in chemistry and can speak to us about her personal experience with what water fluoridation has done to her and her health. Dr. Connett, let's start with you. What got you involved in this issue?
15 years ago, my wife put a bunch of papers on my desk and said, "Would I read these?" And I said, "Well, what is this all about?" And she says, "Fluoridation." I said, "Take that away. These people are crazy." But she persuaded me that I should read these because that evening we were having a village council meeting and they were deciding whether they were going to continue fluoridation or not. And she says, "Look, you've got to read this because I need to know what to tell them, whether we should continue or not." Anyway, reluctantly I started to read these papers and I was actually embarrassed and I was shocked. I was embarrassed because I'd been conned, like most people in America, that the only people opposed to fluoridation are a bunch of crazy people. And I was shocked because contrary to what I felt, that fluoride was benign. You know, that fluorine was very bad, the element, but the compounds were, from a chemical perspective, pretty benign. The shock to me was to find how active they were biologically and also how low the level of fluoride was in mother's milk. And I felt if it's so low in mother's milk, I didn't think that nature had made a mistake. I think it's more likely that the American Dental Association has made mistakes than evolution or Mother Nature or however you perceived the development of baby's first meal.
So the idea is that if we've evolved to filter out fluoride in mothers and what babies are ingesting, if it's taken out of that, therefore it's definitely bad for developing brains and bodies and quite possibly the species generally.
Yeah, we're not absolutely certain of the mechanism, but the thought is that there is some way of excluding fluoride from the baby's meal, from the breast milk. And this is so extreme that a bottle-fed baby in Austin, for instance, is getting 200 times more fluoride than a breastfed baby.
200 times more fluoride than a breastfed baby.
20,000% higher.
That's a phenomenal dosage of fluoride that babies are receiving.
That's right. You fluoridate the water at 0.8 parts per million, and the level in mother's milk is 0.004 parts per million. If you divide 0.8 by 0.004, that's 200 times. And I think there's a warning there. I think, first of all, I think nature is telling us that the baby doesn't need fluoride for healthy teeth or anything. And at the same time, they may be telling us that we have dangers here. And certainly now, whether it was the intention or not, it seems a lucky break for us, or at least the breastfed babies, a lucky break, because we now have 24 studies which indicate a lowering of IQ associated with fluoride exposure at fairly moderate levels.
Lowering IQ. So this health practice that the CDC, the Center for Disease Control of the United States, has touted as one of the top 10 advancements in public health for the 20th century. You're telling me that this is actually associated with lower IQ in children?
Well, not fluoridation per se, but fluoride exposure in countries which have high natural levels. And I argue that the level at which this is occurring, and one study shows a threshold at 1.9 parts per million, I do not believe there's an adequate margin of safety to protect all the children in the United States from lowering of IQ. So some children are more susceptible than others, and you need a safety margin, and that safety margin doesn't exist. But as far as the CDC is concerned, before we get carried away with what they say, there's about 20,000 employees of the CDC in Atlanta, Georgia. But the people that are making these pronouncements on fluoridation is the Oral Health Division. That's only 30 people. And they're all dentally trained. There's hardly a doctor amongst them, no toxicologists. So the statements that they're making is coming from an agency that promotes fluoridation, aggressively promotes fluoridation. They even send their personnel to state legislators supporting mandatory fluoridation. So I think you've got to separate the public relations of fluoridation from the CDC from other wings of the CDC which might be capable of reviewing the scientific literature, but not these guys.
So can you tell us a little bit about the evidence that children are negatively affected by water fluoridation in other countries, as well as this idea of an adequate margin of safety?
Yeah.
So right now in the United States we have between 0.7 and 1.2 generally. That's about half of what the Zhang supposes will be detrimental. Can you talk about the idea of margin of safety?
Yes. First of all, what we know is, and it's not disputed, is that 41% of American children aged 12 to 15 have got a condition called dental fluorosis.
41%
of children aged 12 to 15. And this is an average of children living in fluoridated communities and children living in non-fluoridated communities. 41%. Now, this dental fluorosis indicates the child has been overexposed to fluoride, and you're looking at the first symptoms of fluoride's toxicity. The unanswered question, which goes back to when it started in 1950, is when the fluoride is causing this condition, what's it doing to the other tissues in the baby's body? And they've glossed over this for years and years and years. They've just made the assumption that there's some kind of higher power that's protecting us, regardless of how stupid we are. There's some higher power protecting us. But now, now the chickens are coming home to roost. What we know from the Zhang study is that he compared two villages, and I visited these villages, by the way, in China. Two villages which ostensibly are the same on every count. I mean, if you go to them, the same occupation, same diet, more or less the same location, same everything, same schooling, everything.
So an ideal setup for an experiment.
Epidemiological study, and also Zhang control for lead exposure, iodine intake, family income, and all kinds of things. So it was a good study. And what he found that there was a shift in IQ down for about 10 IQ points across the whole age range between two villages. One village was less than 0.7 parts per million in the well water, average about 0.36 parts per million, and the other village was between 2.5 and 4.5 parts per million, average 2.47. So not very high. So and you see, he plots the IQ curve. IQ is how many kids have different IQs, and you see a shift in the whole IQ curve. So it shifted downwards. The village with the high fluoride has a whole shift in the curve, meaning fewer kids with high intelligence, very high intelligence, and more kids with very low intelligence. And that's striking. Now, so if that effect is happening at 1.9 parts per million, this is what you do. You say, first of all, let's convert that to a dose. Okay, so assuming that the kids are drinking 1 liter of water a day, that dose that causes this effect is 1.9 milligrams per day. Now, when we are extrapolating from a small study like that, it's only 500 kids in that study, and they're more or less uniform genetics, nutrition, and so on. And you've now got to extrapolate what would be a safe dose, knowing that 1.9 milligrams per day hurts these kids as far as the IQ is concerned. What dose could you be sure would protect the whole range of kids in the United States, which is different ethnic groups, different nutritional status, different health status, different everything?
So what dose is safe for an entire population that is very broad and very different?
Right. And what we do normally, the standard safety margin that we apply is 10, a factor of 10. This essentially assumes that some kids are 10 times more sensitive than other kids to this endpoint, which is lowering of IQ.
Or they may drink more water.
Well, that's another thing. That's a separate issue. In fact, you could simply say this: a kid drinking 2 liters of water at 1 part per million is going to get more fluoride than one of those Chinese kids drinking 1 liter at 1.9 parts per million. So yes, you have to account for the range of sensitivity and the range of doses here, because that's one of the huge weaknesses of water fluoridation, that once you put it in the water, you can control the concentration of public water works, but you can't control the dose, because you can't control how much water people are drinking or how much fluoride they're getting from other sources. So let's divide 1.9 milligrams per day by 10 to get a safe dose to protect everyone, and that's 0.19 milligrams per day. That's less than 1 glass of water in Austin.
Stay tuned for more fluoride facts with Dr. Paul Connett, the world's leading expert on water fluoridation, right here on Lone Star Politics.